All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, the CMMC Business Opportunity for MSPs. I'll be your host alongside Mark Menzies today, and Leah Shulabad will be your host today alongside of Mark, where we were going to be talking to you about the business opportunity for MSPs as far as compliance, the compliance wave that's coming, and the things that you need to know, especially as it relates to CMMC as that opportunity for compliance. So you're probably wondering, well, maybe you know who I am and maybe you know who Mark is. But just in case you don't know, I'm Leah Caprice Shilabad. I'm also known as the IT Princess of Power. I'm the author of 2 books. Last year, we released a cybercrime documentary. I'm also the author of the CMMC IT Documentation Toolkit, a CISM, CCP, and my company is an RPO. We've always been, my MSP has been focused on security, documentation, and compliance for many years. I'm excited to help you understand how we've developed these programs and implemented them profitably. I'd also like to introduce you, my co-presenter today, Mark Menzies. Mark, can you tell you a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I don't dress like that every day. I have but I, always wear a collar. I try to anyway. So Mark Menzies, I'm the founder, president, CTO of Overview Technology Solutions. We're a hybrid solutions provider out of New York and now Indiana. We're a C3PAO candidate. We're currently going through the process. It's quite fun, let me tell you. So we like working with other managed service providers and, of course, organizations seeking certification and compliance, rather, in the CMMC ecosystem, as well as working with NIST and ISO frameworks and other regulatory requirements. So I'm a CISSP, HCISPP, and going to be taking that lovely CCP exam next week for CMMC. So super stoked about that. Yeah, that's who I am.
Also seen at events, apparently getting into some shenanigans. So
shenanigans, man. It's important to have fun. It's important to keep that mental health in a positive place. And that helps a lot of us do that.
Awesome. That's right. We gotta have fun.
Yeah.
So let's dive right in. If you're here, you probably know what CMMC is, but in case you don't, CMMC does stand for, it's always important that we get our acronyms right. It's the first thing that a lot of our prospects actually look for to see whether or not we know what the heck we're talking about, is if we know what the acronyms are and what they mean. That's a nice secret for everyone to put in your back pocket. So CMMC is a cybersecurity maturity model certification. It's developed as part of the DoD, the Department of Defense's program to strengthen the cybersecurity posture of the defense industrial base and to protect sensitive government information that's shared with those contractors in the defense industrial base. So Mark, why don't you give like a really quick background of it, like even how we got there, why this is important, and the fact too that some organizations will say things like, "Oh, it's not going to happen," or "Oh, these delays mean that it's like kind of set that groundwork of why like it is definitely going to happen because of how important this compliance is."
Yeah, so I can go through the executive orders, I can go through DFARS, I can go through the whole thing. I'm not going to bore everybody. What the point is that, foreign nation states, are taking information, from our country, from its weakest points, which in some cases is the defense industrial base itself. It's one of the reasons that plants the F-35, whether in whole or in part, ended up in China, things like that. So to address your question, whether or not CMMC itself is going to happen, it could, it might not. Something is going to happen, and that something is almost in all likelihood based on NIST 800-171 revision 2 freeze draft, etc. Something's going to happen and we need to start preparing for it. So CMMC 2.0 as its current iteration is based on NIST 800-171 rev 2. NIST 800-171 rev 3 came out, 3 draft came out. They're targeting I believe it's Q1 of 2024 to have that final revision out there. And this is pretty good about getting to that. And that creates a whole bunch of complications that I don't think that it's appropriate to go through here. But the point is that if you're following the NIST 800-171 framework, and you are in the defense industrial base, whether the requirement happens today or in 2 years, you need to start it today, and it's probably going to be based off of the NIST 800-171 framework. So I hope that helps to give some background there.
That's awesome. That's really good background. And I think it's really key to understand like the cybersecurity maturity model, and the requirements, the contractual requirements that these organizations have are not these are not things that they can say, oh, we don't have to do this or we can get to it at some point. They actually have signed something that says we promise to protect this information. And that's really what compliance is about, right, Mark? It's like we have to identify where the risk is and what it is we're going to protect. For this particular compliance, it's all about the government wanting to protect special information that they release into the regular commercial base. And we'll talk more about that in a few more slides. Most of you that are on this call are probably familiar with the 3 different levels of CMMC 2.0 that was consolidated from 5 levels of maturity in the original 1.0 version. There's an importance to each one of these. The first thing that's important to understand is that the vast majority of the defense industrial base is going to end up being in level 1, which is foundational security. And in that, they only have to do annual self-assessments and attest to certain cybersecurity controls. Those are 15 practices. They're pretty simple, guys. Most of you are going to be doing these things anyway for your clients if you're an MSP or MSSP. And if you aren't, you probably shouldn't be in this business because these are like just best practices, things to be doing. And those 15 practices are based on the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Register. And this applies to every single federal contract. So in a moment, actually, we're going to talk about why that's important. But and honestly, guys, like if you didn't know that before this call, that's okay, because like about a month ago, I was today years old when it hit me as I was reading that FAR that was for all federal contracts. I'm like, wait, these 15 basic safeguards sound really familiar. And then I went into 800-171 and I'm matching them up 1 to 1. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's level 1. Okay, I will admit it takes me a little bit of time, even though I've been doing this for so freaking long. But so that's also important. Don't pretend like you know everything. We have lots of smart people in this community for you to align with.
Oh yeah.
Level 2, which is also the advanced level, this is the one where they have a lot of accountability because there's third-party assessments that are required. At level 2, then this organization has special information that the government wants to protect. And they are required to implement 110 practices based on this special publication, 800-171. And that is required to be doing now. You don't have to implement CMMC now, but you are contractually required to implement those 110 practices if DFAR 7012 is in your contract, and if you handle, store, process, or transmit CUI, the government's information, at that level.
And one of the interesting things about this is that, under CMMC 2.0, you can have CUI, and this is, again, we don't have the final rule yet, this final rule, which will be bestowed upon us someday. And currently, in its current iteration, there are some types of CUI or some conditions in which you will be able to actually self-assess. You'll still have to follow all 110 controls in 800-171 or whatever revision and how many controls there are and such, depending on where that ends up shaking out. And then it's presumed that most will have to have a third party come in. Interesting factoid is that in the draft of revision 3, which level 1 and level 2 both, revision 3 of 171, of which 171 is where level 1 and level 2 both draw from. NIST 800 171 Rev 3 draft does state that you are required to have a third-party assessment. It doesn't name C3PAOs because NIST is not equal to CMMC. NIST does not take any advice or anything from the DoD. They actually really don't talk too often, from my understanding. So it's interesting that these the self-assessments that have now come into level 2, which I don't personally agree with, a little biased being a C3PAO candidate and all, but I truly feel that they're going to come back where it's going to be a third party required to assess your environment. So anyway, Leah, back to you.
Awesome. Okay, and then the last one is going to be level 3, the expert level. These are over 110 practices based on this special publication 800 172. These are going to be very sophisticated cybersecurity programs. There's a very small amount of the defense industrial base that will be required to actually implement at level 3. We don't actually, I don't know if you, Mark, intend on doing a lot of work at level 3. I don't intend on doing much work besides advisory work at that level. First of all, because the market is really small on that level. And secondly, because it's going to be very specialized. And a lot of that is actually still being developed in CMMC. We don't even have a level 3 assessment guide yet.
Yeah, I was going to say from my perspective, I don't really see us seeing too many. My understanding, though, is that they still have to submit a SPUR score. They still have to follow level 1 for FCI. They still have to follow level 2, and I believe they have to get a C3PAO to come in. I'm not sure if I don't think that that's been put out there yet, but I'm pretty sure DibCAC is going to be doing the level 3s, but I'm not sure if there has to be a C3PAO coming in and doing their level 2 first, which is interesting, which means that some of us are going to be doing it at least. Some of us are going to be involved, even just from the assessment perspective, which does make it interesting. But I don't foresee us doing too much with them. They are large, your Lockheeds, your Raytheons, those types.
Yep. So when we keep talking about about how many contractors are going to end up in each one of these buckets, it's important for you to understand the addressable market size. So your estimated market size of the defense industrial base, these are going to be primes and then other organizations that kind of flow down from there, is about 200,000, which is huge, right? So if we have a lot of people in level 1, level 2 is small, and level 3, there is a huge need for organizations that know and understand this compliance to be able to guide organizations in this kind of compliance, because there are many of them that are affected, and they're not going to be able to maintain contracts unless they actually align with these compliance requirements. So who needs CMMC? Who needs to be compliant? And actually, this is not just CMMC. So I want you to understand that when you have a conversation with the prospect about what's required right now, and they try to push back on you for, well, CMMC is actually not really a thing yet, or we have time. Like we showed you before in the last, those 15 requirements, if you have a federal contract, you have federal contract information, right now, you are required to protect that federal contract information with those 15 basic safeguards. Right now, you're required to implement NIST 800-171 now. That's not going to change when CMMC comes. CMMC is going to be like the accountability piece. So firms have to do this now. It takes a long time to implement this kind of thing in an organization because of the required changes. So who needs CMMC? Who needs this kind of compliance? Primes and subcontractors who handle CUI and FCI. Any suppliers in that supply chain who might have access to CUI or FCI. And also support organizations who provide services and scope for CMMC compliance. And guys, that could potentially mean you and me, depending on what kind of work we're doing.
Can I touch on that really quick? So
Please.
we're in the process of doing our we actually took we did a DibCAC assessment. We actually paused right before the assessment started because of a disagreement in scope.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It was something on us. We weren't completely prepared, but from my understanding, most C3PAOs don't uh, pass on the first attempt either. So one of the challenges, though, the biggest challenges that we came in weren't implementing the controls, weren't doing this one. It's all of our MSP tools. It's all of our this, it's all of our that.
mhm,
We're gonna have a big problem. We're
mhm.
running into a big problem. It's gonna continue to be a thing. So you got to be careful about that. Get started now, because the things that you don't think are going to be a problem later are going to be a problem later. So get all the little things out of the way. Align yourself with at the very least like NIST CSF or something like that, which is kind of inclusive of 800 171. But you're going to be asked to be accountable. I ask all of our the OSCs I speak with, and who always in many cases are using a different managed services provider. I'm like, are they following this? Do they have some sort of
Yes,
responsibility matrix? Because
yes.
you're in bed with them now, and you gotta hold them accountable too. It's really important.
And because you're going to end up being in scope, that means that when you show up, just like Mark, when you said because if you want to be a C3PAO, then you have to align your entire organization with 800-171 and CMMC at level 2 in order to do that. You have to. That's a requirement. But for MSPs that want to serve an organization that has to have that compliance, you're going to be part of that, because if you've got your RMM tool in that environment, if you have your security stack in that environment, that like the assessor is going to say, I need to, oh, you have remote access to this network? Well, show me all the documentation on that. Show me how it's compliant. Show me how it's aligned. Do you have MFA? Because you are now we say this, right? We say, well, we're kind of like an extension of your company, or we are your IT department. So you've made yourself part of that. So this
We've
compliance
made our bed. All of
is
our
you.
marketing's made our
Yes.
bed for us. Yeah, absolutely. And so that last one, I want to highlight that. I want to highlight one more thing.
Mm,
Estimated market size. You're going to see that number all over the place, and I was just confused about this. And somebody put it into perspective for me recently. I went to CMMC Day. Leah, were you there?
mm-mm,
Ah, you got to go
mm.
next year. I wouldn't do a go last year. You got to go. It was but I think you went to something anyway. Um, we had dinner, drinks afterwards, and I found a bunch of people who are like pretty active on like these like the cooey boy, like the discords and things like that. I found like the cool kids.
Not, yes, yes, yes.
Our cool
Our
kids. I found the cool
people.
kid. I found our people. And we did a really deep dive, and we're like, well, what's the number? What's the real number? Why do we not know the number? How does the DoD not know the number? This is insane. The DoD don't know. They know who wins the contracts. They know who the primes are. I think they might know who some of the subs are, but once you go down, like down into the rabbit hole, you get 5 levels deep. No
Yeah,
one has that number.
yeah.
The upper limit of this number is actually 1.4 million. I don't think it's right. I don't
Wow.
feel that, because that'd be what? Is there a DIB company for every the what, like 300 people in the country? That seems a little, well, maybe it doesn't actually seem that high anymore. But there's it's a lot bigger than we think it is, and this
Hmm.
doesn't count like state regulations, things like that. So a lot of regulatory compliance is going to come around, and I think that a lot of it's going to be based off of what NIST regulations are, which is NIST frameworks there are, and which CMMC draws from. So
Yeah, so that we need good MSPs to enter into this market that know what they're doing, that are serious about compliance, that are serious about security, to be able to support these companies. Because Mark and I can't do it by ourselves. Like, we need people on our team to be able to help. All right. So this might happen if you start to work with an organization. The first thing that you have to identify is, what is the information they have to protect? If you're in compliance, that's what you're going to do. What are the things we have to protect in the organization, and then build a program around that. In this particular compliance, what you're concerned about is FCI and CUI. It's possible that you show up to a client and you say, okay, show me what it is you have to protect. Where's your CUI? And they might say to you, Mark, what do they say sometimes?
I don't know what is CUI, what's not CUI. Who can tell me that? And the answer is not
Yeah,
the MSP.
that's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. So CUI is going to be information that's owned or created by the government, or potentially created by a contractor that the government instructed them to create, or that they need to create in order to fulfill a contract. and the government has determined that that information is sensitive and needs specific safeguards and dissemination controls. So they say this is, and it could be either. It could be something the government says, here's a drawing, like right here. Oops, shoot, I just did that. Wait, I'm going the wrong way. It could be a drawing, like the government says a spec for a manufacturer to create a from a drawing. It could be technical reports. So an organization is doing testing, and some of that, the test results are considered CUI, and that's being generated by the contractor, by that company in the DIB. Or I've seen this before. An organization receives specs from the government and they have to create a drawing to spec. That drawing is now CUI. They've created CUI. So it can flow from like through the supply chain from the government directly, or it can be created by the contractor. And Mark's 100% correct. We are not the ones that determine what CUI is. We can't do that. We have to guide from a position of like, we have to help to guide them without being the ones to tell them what to do. We have to say, it's your responsibility as the data custodian to determine which of those things you're going to treat as CUI. Because if you want to keep going down this, well, we don't know what CUI is, we don't know what we have that's CUI, you have to be able to guide them to say, well, let's say that you don't know for sure. You have to choose. What would you like to choose? And you have to have them start there.
Absolutely. And one of the other, and this is, it's interesting, is that in theory, you can enclave by cage code or by contract, and there's a whole bunch of ways to do this. And I think you'd mentioned earlier that our entire enterprise would need to be CMMC 2.0 compliant. We enclaved because we would have to like destroy every tool that we had. So we have an enclave. I'm not insane, but one of the interesting things is that what we find is that no one knows what their CUI is. Sometimes the government surprisingly doesn't mark things properly when they send it to you. They don't give clear expectations as to when you've created it, because as Leah was stating, there's an owner, and then there's also dissemination controls and things like that assigned, associated with CUI, and that needs to be clearly marked. There's a way to mark things. There's a full listing that NARA has. A ton of information on in the CUI registry. And then we also have things like, the CUI, the DoD CUI mandatory CUI. Wow, I said CUI 6 or 7 times. The CUI mandatory training that that the DoD provides. That I'd say any MSP dealing with anybody in the DIB, take it, get your little cutesy little certificate. Takes less than an hour to do. Throw it in a folder. And then you can take some of those. You could meet some of those requirements later, actually. And it's a really cool thing, and it gives you a lot more information than the two of us even have time to go through here. But
oh yeah,
big takeaways here. Government doesn't always tell the OSC. OSC doesn't always know what is, when they've created the contract officer, their contact at the DoD or at the prime or at the subcontractor, if they're subcontracting from the subcontractors from the subcontractor, the person above them that gave them the contract can point them in the right direction to say, is this not, is this not? And when in doubt, I would push back. You're allowed to push back, because at the end of the day, you also want to make sure that this is a pragmatic solution. If everybody protects everything all the time and everything's CUI, then nothing can get done, and then the whole thing falls apart because you let progress get in the way of perfect get in the way of progress. So that's a big thing you want to avoid. Like Lee was saying earlier, no one to say you're not sure, and MSP can't be responsible for everything there.
Yeah. And so a key is to understand that this compliance, just like every other single kind of cybersecurity compliance, is a journey, not a destination. And this is the key when you're going to build your offering and go to market to help organizations with compliance. If all you are thinking is, I'm going to go and sell projects, then first of all, that's all you're going to get is projects. And second of all, if you continue your relationship with that client and you don't help them to actually maintain their compliance over time, then you're doing a massive disservice to the organization in 2 ways. The first is that they're not going to be ready for assessment. And when they go for assessment and they fail, they're going to look at you because you have not done compliance over time. And you're going to say, oh, but that's not what you paid me for. but that's not what the client thinks. This is a freaking checklist. They don't get that this is a journey of compliance actions and a cadence continuously over time. That is what you sell. That's how you get that monthly recurring revenue, is by selling that journey of overtime. Yes, tons of work in the beginning. Yes, lots of remediation, but then it's not done. It's not like, oh, we're compliant. All right. Because the day after you say that, or the moment after you say that, somebody presses something and your environment is out of alignment.
That's true. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it is so in some ways I think it is a destination. We just haven't received the destination yet because we don't have any final rule anywhere. So it is a journey. It's a journey and constantly improving. But eventually it will be a destination with certain, clear and key requirements. But that's the general security statement is it's about the journey, not the destination, because you can't complete security. Security is not perfect. They're gonna build another better mousetrap tomorrow. It's just how our world works. So one of the ways that we help to rein in that journey is using a platform to do it. For us, what we used to do was we put everything in spreadsheets, and that's
Uh,
it's a big pain. It works. It works, especially it works, but it's very
hard.
difficult to like do everything in a not in a manual way. It just takes forever. You have team members who could be doing other things now working on this. I mean, we have thousands of hours into our into this because we were using spreadsheets to do it. And I started talking to Shai a few months ago, and we found Kamanja, and I was like, "Oh man, I wish we'd used this from the beginning." We're too far down in the rabbit hole for us, but not for our clients. Our clients are using it.
Mhm.
But on our second round, we'll be implementing the software internally to help with the risk assessment, especially, and keeping everything organized, and also asking the different contractors and such for information, so that and filling out checklists so that we don't have to chase people around, or at least make it easier
Mhm.
once we actually get the information. So, Leah, do you want to talk a little bit about your, I guess, experiences with GRC, what to look for in a good GRC? Unless
Oh
I'm
yeah.
distracting us from the point.
No, no, totally. Yeah. I mean, we did go down the spreadsheet route originally as well and found that really difficult to manage, especially across a lot of different clients. I mean, I guess it's different if you're just internal IT and using a spreadsheet, but then like, where are you going to store that spreadsheet? Who has access to it? Are you emailing it to people? Then you've got version control issues. And honestly, like even the most wonderful Excel spreadsheet is not going to do the same kind of a thing that a GRC tool will do. GRC is going to be able to assure that that it has, like, first of all, you have to make sure that the control set that you're using to align your clients in there. In this case, it's going to be 800-171 CMMC controls. Um, and and then have the kind of capability to be able to tie assets that the organization has to the different types of controls so that you can see like how are we meeting this control. So not just a checkbox to say, you know, for how you were doing audit and accountability controls, like how are you taking logs from the system. You can't just say, well we take logs from the system and look at them. Like that can't be the way that you're meeting the control. So a good GRC will not only say yes, we're doing this, but be able to tell you how by potentially linking it, like, a place to say, we have implemented Nessus, or we've implemented Microsoft Sentinel, and link that tool to certain controls so you can actually see this is how we're meeting this. And then also be able to have policy and procedure plans that are also linked to those particular controls too, so you can assure that that you've addressed it with written documentation. Because in compliance, it just can't be tribal knowledge. You can't just say, oh, this is just the practice that we do, or everybody knows that this is how we create a new user. You have to have SOPs for that. You have to have IT policy. And actually, it's a current requirement for all organizations that have CUI to have an incident response plan.
One of the most interesting things that I found actually when going through the platform is that, and I said spreadsheet like there's one, there's like 1,000. You know, we had it like, you know, ourselves convinced. We're like, okay, and the reason I'm using us as an example is because we have probably the most work and time on the complexity of our own system because of we're a managed services provider and a C3PO candidate. So we have a lot of like considerations to make, and you know, we also have a lot of scrutiny against us because it's not just, you know, not the C3PO is not going to have scrutiny, but DibCAC is coming in and looking at our environment, and we're like, oh my God, think about everything. One of the biggest challenges when we did need to make a change, obviously we followed our change process and everything like that. Our biggest challenge is updating the documentation, not for any particular reason, but because we have things in like maybe 50 documents, 60 documents, an SSP, policies that are referenced in the SSP, procedures that are referenced in the SSP, documents with information in them referenced in the SSP. And we tried our best to make sure that, you know, we only have one thing in one place, so that if we update something, it only gets updated in one place, updated in one place, updated in one place. Over time, that becomes really difficult. And then if you have to change the name of a document or the revision of a document, you have to go through all of them. So then we have a table, and the table is another spreadsheet, and it says what each thing references in each place. So if we change one thing as it, you end up getting so far down and deep in. We're like, there has to be a better way. This is the better way. It works, and it makes it a heck of a lot easier to change references to things, add documentation, and actually function instead of just being like, I'm going to be the wizard at Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. Congratulations, that doesn't help you with compliance. Even if you have all the right, you know, people accessing some, you know, a spreadsheet and SharePoint, you did it all the right way, you're going to run into these problems, and it's going to be this, if the stuff that's, you know, the CCPs and the CCAs and the lead assessor and the C3POs, you know, are going to direct, you know, everyone to do, you know, during the assessment. These are going to be the things that people are looking for, especially as you mature and go on, because you could get it all pristine and perfect. Then you make one change, you pull out that thread, and then you need to go through all the documentation again. Are you prepared to do that? Have something do it for you.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yes, 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 yes. That's also so huge, so huge. And especially like with CMMC, there is, especially at level 2, there's a heavy requirement for documentation. Where some compliances there's not as heavy of a requirement. Yes. All right. So let's say that you're here, we've either convinced you or you're here because you really want to understand, like, what should we do if we're going to sell this and go to market. So the model that that we usually use, the first thing you have to do is you have to understand your client's business, right? And you have to understand that data that you want to protect, and how that data is related to the business process. If you don't start there, then you're not going to serve your client properly, because like Mark said, Mark chose an enclave. And in this smaller environment of his company, that's what the compliance requirement is right in there. That's his scope. If you walk in the door and you just don't learn about the company and you start to just spout off, oh, well, you need GCC high and you need this and you need that and you need SIM and you need, without having any idea about the organization, you're going to get them to spend a lot of money. You probably won't even make them compliant the way that they have to be. They're going to get ticked off. Your company's going to get a bad name. And then Mark and I are going to have to come in and fix everything, and they're going to have to spend money again.
yeah, and
Don't do
then, you know, that's gonna have to come from somewhere. And I've been telling everybody this: if you're starting to deal with compliant organizations organizations that need to be compliant to or they're trying to become compliant to a framework, that need to be compliant for a regulatory reason, that need to be compliant to something for a reason like CMMC, just make sure your errors and omissions is where it needs to be, your insurance is where it needs to be, your cyber
Yes.
liability insurance as well. But for this is more like professional liability, like if somebody loses multi-million-dollar contracts and they can't do this because they don't have enough time before the requirements because you've convinced them otherwise, like
Yeah.
you're going to be putting yourself in a really bad place. I've seen the beginnings of it, and I'm like, oh, this isn't going to end well. But we'll see.
Yep. I'm totally there. And so when you get to know your client well, and you talk to them about how CMMC is a journey, you explain, we're going to definitely find things we have to fix and remediate. There will be projects, but projects are not the end. We have to continue on this journey together. We have to have a mechanism for continuing to realign the environment and to collect information, data, and do all the compliance activities. So you bring that expertise to the table with a process And a GRC should help you with that process too, of being able to continue. And that's other value that you bring by having that tool involved with the compliance management. And then by providing them that clear and concise advice, I mean, when they show up and they want to be compliant or they have to be compliant, every organization, every CEO, every manager wants to know two things. They want to know how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? And that really helps to like a GRC where you have a good poem and then you can like create projects from that. Like it really, really, really helps to be able to have that information in there in a clear way. And
You make a
then
really good
go ahead.
point. I'm gonna just, if you don't mind if I interject.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest challenges that we face anyway is someone coming in and say, well, what's it gonna cost? Because that's the first question, right?
Yeah.
And what's important is that you enter them into a process. The process isn't going to be, hey, it's going to cost you $20,000 to do this, or it's going to cost you $50,000 to do this, it's going to cost you $110,000 to do this. You don't know, and if somebody gives them that number, and they're like, okay, great, and then they go with somebody else, then maybe you didn't want that as them as a client, or you didn't want to continue working with them, because you can't know how much it's going to cost probably or the work effort's going to be until you go through certain processes, and those processes are driven by a GRC platform, or helped or assisted to be driven by a GRC platform, but they are basically putting in POAMs and or figuring out your gaps, doing risk analysis, gap analysis, POAMs, and then once you figure out all your POAMs, you could start putting prices and numbers to them. What's the level of effort? What's my timeline on this? As we all know, in the professional services industry, and IT especially, is like, if something needs to be done quickly, you might cost more because you have to, pull in a sub or do this or do that, or something like that, or the convenience fee. If you're able to schedule it out, with those POAMs. But again, getting them into a system, getting them into a place that's going to be success, and setting that expectation that you can ballpark it, but you're no way in hell going to give them a solid number at the beginning, because you don't know what that work effort's going to be. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure. And GRC platforms drive the ability for you to have the visibility on that information, do that risk assessment, do that gap analysis, figure out those POAMs.
Yeah.
And then put the dollar amount on it.
Yep. And the key here, guys, is you have to avoid commoditization of your services. All right. You are not selling them a checklist. You're going to tell them, we're going to implement and maintain a cybersecurity compliance program, because I'm telling you, if all you do is you go in and say, and think about it as a checklist, where we're going to go down here and like, pencil whip all these boxes to get compliant, which is sort of oftentimes where your client shows up and thinks that that's what should happen. If you go and do that, then they're going to have a massive amount of effort at the beginning. You're not going to actually provide them massive value. And then after that, they're not going to understand why they have to continue to work with you. So at the very beginning, you help them understand that if we just say those exact things I did, if we just look at this as a checklist and some projects to remediate, yes, we'll be able to check some boxes for compliance, but you'll spend a lot of money, time, and effort, and you won't get the value. In order to 10x this, we're going to implement a cybersecurity compliance program using CMMC and the security controls in CMMC. And this program makes sure that over time, the organization stays secure and aligned. And so you have regular activities that you do, and you not only have the tool can help you even say like when certain things are going to happen, when you're going to have certain meetings with the client, when you're going to do things like a tabletop, and be able to have that information in the tool as well. That is where the value comes. That's when you can charge, $3,600, $5,500, $10,000 a month for a cybersecurity compliance program, as opposed to just trying to think of it as a checklist and just try to remediate a POAM.
Absolutely. 100%.
Okay. So the fact of the matter is that if you figure out how to implement cybersecurity compliance programs, then it can be more cost effective. So you have a plan. Something like a GRC helps to give it like structure, so you can do the same sort of thing each time. Obviously, each client environment is a little different, but now you know how to implement and maintain these programs. And you just continue to do that. Next client, next client, next client. Get them into the tool and then get them through the steps and then continue into compliance. It's profitable because instead of just trading dollars for hours or just trying to sell them a security tool set, you're selling them the fact that you have a process to be able to get them compliant and stay compliant over time. And you should be thinking about the time that you invest in this as being worth $500 to $700 an hour. So don't put that on paper to them, but think about that when you're pricing your offering to make sure that you're pricing it profitably enough. And then time saving. If you have a tool like a GRC that will be able to capture the information for you and be able to help you to manage it, all of those processes become faster and easier. And it saves you time, which makes you more profitable. And it saves your client so much time and energy because you have a process that you just implement and they don't have to they don't have to reinvent the wheel and everything. They save massive amounts of time by working with you with your proven process.
So, kind of to wrap all this up, you were mentioning with you're valuing the time 500 to 700 an hour or something like that. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of us make are if we're actually offering compliance as a service, is obviously you have to put your scope of work in there, what you're going to be helping them out with, what's going to be included. Because otherwise, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to be accountable to your time, accountable to this, accountable to that. And then when people start seeing that $500 to $700 an hour in your presumed profitability, if you're giving information that this is how much time we're spending, et cetera, it's it creates a problem. People don't like seeing those numbers. If you have everything wrapped around a platform and the platform is doing most of the work, you're giving your results. You're not selling your time, you're selling the result. The result is going to be this. A platform running the proper way and set up properly gives you the ability to command that larger per hour. And right now, a lot of managed service providers I know are starting off on their compliance as a service offering journey. I believe that whatever number there are now, it's going to be 10x in terms of the number of solution providers that are going to be providing services like this. It's an eventuality. Everybody, whether it be CMMC or whether it be something that the state of New York, which is doing some things right now, which I'm very confused about because it's like they're going from 0 to 1,000 with certain types of critical infrastructure. One of the challenges going to be is that every managed service provider, every solution provider is going to want to be using a platform. They should be using a platform. They need to use a platform because every customer of theirs eventually, I think with very rare exceptions, is going to need to be compliant to something. And as you grow and as you continue to develop your practice, if it's all in spreadsheets, if it's all following a non-standardized process that you have, whether you're the business owner who's leading this charge, whether you're the one-man department or one-woman department in the managed services provider who's providing the service, you're going to need a way to expand the service, expand the offering, or the service is going to start to degrade and you're going to end up not being able to, it's the same recipe for managed services. That's why we're calling it compliance as a service. It's the same thing. You have to consider it the same thing and put the same type of resources towards it and the same onus on processes and such. So, yeah.
So remember, you want to sell the value of what you are providing, being able to bring the compliance is not a checklist. The compliance is the value of what the security is going to bring to the organization. You don't want to be a commodity because then they're just going to price shop you. And we don't want this to be, it does not make sense for it to be like a race to zero. Who wants to do that? Like MSP services are already being commoditized enough. Determine whether and this is really huge. Like compliance is coming. In December of 2021, I was down in Miami and I was talking with Fred Vicola, the CEO of Kaseya, and I don't really care what you think about Kaseya. The guy is a smart guy. And I was like, so what's coming for MSPs? What's the next big thing? And that was December 2021. He put up his arms like this and he goes, compliance is coming. And I was like, preach, brother, preach. It's speaking my language, right? But he was not just prophetic, like he saw it. This is a year and a half later, guys. Like we are in the midst of it, the thick of it. Now is when you have to make a decision about whether you're going to be a compliance as a service provider or whether you're going to align with an organization like somebody like me or Mark that we can do the compliance for you and you're just going to be the MSP. You have to figure that out now. And doesn't matter what you choose, like no one's going to judge you if you want to just like be an MSP and have a friend that's going to do the compliance stuff for you. That's fine. Stick with your core competency, but figure it out now, because if you don't, then other organizations that are taking it compliance seriously and have a really strong offering might swoop in under there and take all of the business from you. So figure out right now what it is that you want to do, how you're going to position yourself in this compliance as a service market. Make that decision now.
Alternatively, if you're not 100% sure, I'll be the less of a strong sale on this, only because, alternate theory. If you're, and I agree with everything that you said, and regardless of my feelings on Kaseya, I agree with Fred on that 110%. He's right. He's a smart guy. You're 100% right about that. And so the one thing though is that if you are going to try to do it yourself and for your clients, you need something so that if you are going to eventually hand this off to somebody else, if it gets too much, too complicated, you have to have it standardized, or else no one's going to want to take on that dumpster fire. And then you're going to run into a big problem, because you're going to have to continue to run that service, because journey not destination. The thing is that, some marathon runners are very good at passing the baton, but with all the intricacies and it's only 110 controls. I mean, it seems like a lot, but it seems like it's not a lot, but it's a lot. Passing that off is actually very, 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 very difficult and could be very, very expensive for your client. So standardizing on something, anything, even if you're not checking off every mental box in what you want, you have to start somewhere with something. Like that's my call to action, is start something now. Even if it's not handing it off, it's starting something now with some platform somewhere.
Yep. Agreed. So clearly, like we're talking to you from a Kamanja platform, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's a really fantastic and amazing GRC tool. And the thing that I really love about the platform is not just its functionality, but the people who are behind it. So we're talking about not only smart people, but we're talking about people who are always looking to improve the tool on a constant basis, listen to users, listen to the board, and say, like, well, how can we make this more user friendly? How can we add more value? Show me the processes that you use for compliance, and let's implement this in the tool and continue to develop it. You want to make sure that you're aligning with an organization that's taking that kind of thing very seriously, because whatever you choose for this tool is going to reflect on you. So let's say right now you are thinking, you know what, I really want to figure this out. I really want to have a system to be able to onboard compliance as a service and figure out what my process is, especially around this tool. So what Kamanja has done, which I think is absolutely awesome and amazing, is they developed a free program that's developed exclusively for MSPs and MSSPs called Let's Adopt Compliance as a Service in 14 Days. How about that? I think that's absolutely freaking amazing. So this is going to be very focused. It's going to help you to understand how to develop your compliance as a service offering, how to utilize a tool to be able to show the client what it is you're doing, so they don't understand, like they understand how and what they're spending money on, can see results. And all you have to do is book a consulting call by going to kamanja.io. And then the awesome team at Kamanja will get on the line with you, ask you a couple of questions, make sure that this makes sense for you, because it's an important program. They're only accepting certain MSPs that are really serious about doing this. And then they're going to show you the secrets to adopt compliance as a service in only 14 days.
Absolutely. And if you're going to kamanja.io, you can click on the book a demo, and they'll get you into the right into the right thing, and make sure that you can join the program. Just trying to find where it is on the website. There it is. Okay, right there. There we go. um, Trying to think if there's anything in closing that we wanted to go over that we didn't really touch on. I read most of NIST 800-171 Rev Freeze draft. It's a lot. They're changing a lot, and we'll see where the DoD ends up, going with that. But aside from that, there's not much other news. Leah, do you want to finish this up?
I would just say, after reading the latest revision, things that were salient in there that I think are important when you're thinking about a tool is that risk management, vendor risk management, and planning is all part of the next revision. And like Mark said, it's going to be about 2 years until that affects CMMC itself. But a tool like Kamanja already has all those things built into it. So it's not going to be something you have to completely overhaul your program when it hits CMMC. You're already going to be doing the freaking thing. And that is another thing that you can also sell when you go to market with this too, is that this is future proofing their compliance requirement as well, because you can see in the future what's coming and we can do all this and implement it now.
Oh yeah. Anyway, Rev 3, by the way, they're targeting Q1 2024. It's
Right,
2023. I forget too.
Yeah.
But
No. I'm just talking about the
CMMC.
CMMC.
Oh yeah, CMMC. Oh yeah. Sorry, misunderstood. But yes, absolutely. I think a couple years, but starting now is important.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. All right, everybody. So we'll see you with all the cool kids in the Let's Adopt Compliance in Service and a 14 days program. And for us, stay secure.